The views and opinions expressed on the following program are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent those of any organization, including One Generation Away.
The freedom of a people to choose its leaders is the root of liberty.
Keep alive this experiment in liberty.
Liberty, in case you've forgotten, is the soul's right to breathe.
Government should be very minimal in protecting liberty.
Peace cannot be purchased at the cost of liberty.
The sturdy ground of liberty.
Liberty once lost is lost forever.
Fight for their liberty and for our security.
Guarantees individual liberty.
This great republic, born alone in liberty.
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 Liberty. Liberty.
Just how much do you want liberty?
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner,
a production of LibertyNation.com.
cutting through the double talk, taking on the topics, going after what the politicians really mean, and making it all clear. For your freedom and your liberty. Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
As Joe Biden is declared the winner of the presidential election by the Electoral College, the response among Republicans is as varied as the three faces of Eve. Only today, we will present the five faces of the GOP post-election 2020. Welcome back into Liberty Nation Radio, a production, as always, of LibertyNation.com and heard from coast to coast on the Radio America Network. While Trump voters across the nation continue in their refusal to believe the reported outcome of the presidential election, we'll dig deeply into the widely differing responses among Republicans. And as he continues to fight on, we'll broaden the view to the entirety to date of the Trump presidency, how he has been from the start one man against the world. Famed columnist Cal Thomas will broaden the discussion even more as he joins us to talk over his latest book, apropos to the moment, America's Expiration Date, the Fall of Empires and Superpowers, and the Future of the United States. And LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor Scott Cosenza jumps on board to examine the latest threats and promising developments regarding your individual liberty in Talkin' Liberty.
Say what? Say what? Say what? One more time.
We kick things off with our signature segment, Say What, where we roll out a virtual assembly line of wacky, astonishing, damnable, and ultimately revealing things uttered by politicians in the chattering class. So Joe Biden was declared president-elect this week by the Electoral College with an almost exact reversal of the 2016 result. Biden 306, Trump 232. And so it is reported that Joe Biden, who was pretty much a laugh line throughout the election campaign, became president on the strength of more than 81 million votes, 16 million more than the ultimate rock star Barack Obama received at the height of his popularity in 2008. And as he staggered through his victory speech, this next president of ours became a laugh line once more.
And once again, in America, the rule of law, more Americans voted this year than have ever voted in the history of the United States. Votes counted. President Pence received when they won in 2016. Excuse me. Or dispute the results margin 4 years ago. And yet, I thank them. And I'm convinced we can work together for the good of the nation. You know, in this battle for the soul of America, democracy prevailed. We, the people, voted to unite, to heal. I will be president for all Americans.
For 4 years, the syndicate of political, corporate, and media power pounded us every single day with what an embarrassment Donald Trump is to the nation. What exactly would you call that which you just heard? Feeling good about having this man in charge of the nuclear codes? But with the Electoral College declaring Biden as president this week, it has brought out a smorgasbord of responses from elected representatives of the Republican Party. Some remain defiant, while others are prone to go along to get along after an election which has been and will surely continue to be clouded by dispute, with a great bulk of Trump voters discounting the legitimacy of the outcome. We've narrowed it down to what we'll call the five faces of the GOP. We'll start with the institutional response from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, evidently seeking to curry favor with the incoming administration.
The Electoral College has spoken. So today I want to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden. I also want to congratulate the Vice President-elect, our colleague from California, Senator Harris. Beyond our differences, all Americans can take pride that our nation has a female Vice President-elect for the very first time.
But as McConnell seems to fully accept the outcome with his institutional response, his colleague, Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, engaged in an ugly exchange with Democrat Senator Gary Peters of Michigan on gaslighting the Hunter Biden laptop corruption story, which was so effectively censored by the elite media in the run-up to the election.
50 people associated with the intelligence community after our Hunter Biden investigation and the revelations of the Hunter Biden computer said, oh, this is Russian disinformation. Now we find out, no, it's a real investigation by the Justice Department. So it's just galling, and I just have to point out that the purveyors of Russian disinformation, Hillary Clinton's campaign, the DNC, the Steele dossier, the ranking member Peters accusing Senator Grassley and I of disseminating Russian disinformation, that's where the disinformation is coming. That's where the false information, the lies, the false allegations. I can't sit by here and listen to this.
Mr. Chairman, I got to respond to that. I mean, you're saying I'm putting out information. Well, one, I had nothing to do with this report.
You lied repeatedly. I did not. You lied repeatedly in the press that I was spreading Russian disinformation, and that was an outright lie. And I told you to stop lying, and you continue to do it.
But the work of Democrats with the invaluable assistance of the Trump-deranged media succeeded in burying the Biden corruption story until the election was already over. From Johnson's defiant response, we move to yet another senator, this time one who suffered a decisive defeat himself in the 2012 presidential election and who has since been a leading never-Trumper in the GOP, apparently bitter that Trump accomplished what he never could, Mitt Romney.
The biggest concern that I have is that people here genuinely believe that somehow this election was stolen, and there's not evidence of that. The president was saying it was stolen even before Election Day happened. He said if he loses, it would be fraud. Well, no one knows that. I thought I was going to win, too, when I ran for president in 2012. I didn't. I didn't go out and say fraud. What's going on now, I'm afraid, is terribly dispiriting to people all over the globe.
But then there are those who continue to fight the reported result of the election, led by a Trump elector in Wisconsin, Bill Feehan, who is declaring as a so-called alternative elector in fighting the certified result in his state.
There's fraud in every presidential election. The question is, does it rise to a level where it changes the outcome of the election? And here in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Elections Commission repeatedly ignored state law. Number one, by issuing 215,000 ballots with no identification. The Electoral College will meet on January 6th, a joint session of Congress. So that hasn't happened yet.
Indeed, that last step of formalizing the election of the president must be performed by Congress after the new year and before the scheduled presidential inauguration on January 20th. But from those Republicans still fighting to overturn the result, we move to those in the GOP upset by Trump's refusal to accept defeat, including one retiring Congressman, Paul Mitchell, who's gone so far as to quit the GOP.
It became clear to me that I could no longer be associated with the Republican Party, that leadership does not stand up and say, the process, the election is over. It's over today. And then I saw the president tweet out that it's not over till January 20. Somehow he's going to continue to combat this. The people have voted. I voted for Donald Trump. I supported the administration policies 95, 96% of the time the last two terms. But this party has to stand up for democracy first, for our Constitution first. I've had enough.
So there you go. The five faces of the GOP post-election 2020. The institutionalist, the blame placer, the Trump hater, the fighter, and the quitter. Republicans trying to regroup after a stunning defeat, which most of them don't believe was real. Quick break, and then we're back to place in perspective the unforgettable presidency of Donald Trump, one man against the world.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com. With one click, you get tomorrow's news today with LNTV's Hot Topics and Analysis, Liberty Nation Radio, The Uprising and Rabbit Hole podcasts, and dozens of insightful original articles. And now, you can keep your kids ahead of the curve with LNGenZ.com. LN Gen Z brings a free-thinking education right into your home for students of every grade level with articles, videos, worksheets, and ready-to-go curriculum. While the media establishment giants are sleeping, you can stay ahead of the curve with LibertyNation.com and get tomorrow's news today. LibertyNation.com.
Liberty Nation Gen Z. Becoming a strong defender of freedom and liberty doesn't just happen, it's taught. LN Gen Z is your portal for news that's hot, engaging articles without the spin. Go to lngenz.com for riveting videos that foster critical thinking. Download worksheets and quizzes for each age level. At lngenz.com, the future starts today. Combating propaganda. Defending freedom. lngenz.com. A free-thinking future starts here.
We believe that all men are entitled to the blessings of liberty.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Now that the last best hope held out by President Trump for sustaining his presidency has been extinguished by the Supreme Court, and electors have fulfilled their appointed constitutional duty of determining the next occupant of the Oval Office, the 45th president sits on the precipice of history, relegating him to the register of one-term presidents. But what a ride it's been in the 5.5 years since he descended what may now be the most renowned escalator in history. He may have been brought low by forces beyond his control that have now marked him as only the fourth chief executive in the last century to fail in his bid for re-election. But we knew Jimmy Carter and Bush 41, Hoover not so much, and that Donald is no Jimmy, George, or Herbert. From the start, we knew or should have known just how hard the road would be for Donald Trump, lest we forget what he intended to achieve as president of the United States, represented arguably the most radical frontal assault on the status quo since Americans took up arms against each other in the war between the states. He would burst onto the scene with a theatrical flourish and be instantly perceived as something entirely different, much more or less than all the politicians we'd seen for time immemorial. He'd be willing to forsake an enviable life of wealth, fame, and power in exchange for the poisonous slings and arrows of the hordes of careerists, top to bottom, disconcerted and threatened to the core by his presence. He would present as the one man who could take on and effect genuine reform by the force of his will. And he would be forced to do so while laboring under the burden of a ubiquitous and deranged alliance of enemies which no man could seem to bear, while placing the weight of altering the trajectory of the nation and the world squarely on his own broad shoulders. He would come to Washington alone, bereft of institutional support, pledging to throw out old practices and policies. He would do so for the sake of exposing and challenging that which had forever been off limits. He would call out the corruption long preserved, protected, and defended by an encrusted and discredited political and media syndicate. The Swampocrats would no longer be comfortable in their distance from and unaccountability to the people they purportedly serve. As enemies throughout the syndicate committed to his destruction from day one, he would do just as he did in the campaign preceding his shock election, go over their heads and appeal straight to the heart of the millions who had all but given up on politics. Shortly after his election, he would swiftly set the tone for draining the swamp by publicly disputing the price of the new Air Force One negotiated by the politicians and soon inducing a substantial discount. It signaled that the new boss would not resemble any of the old bosses. He'd send the unambiguous signal that America was open for business as never before. And it would hardly be the only time he would scold the career politicians and apparatchiks, allowing this country to be ripped off from adversaries like China to friends like NATO, while bowing to an agenda tailored not for America, but the globe. He would be one man against the world, the figurative equivalent of that lone soul standing in the path of the tank at Tiananmen Square. With his near-quixotic quest to return America to a lost greatness, he would simultaneously define his enemies in a fashion reserved only for a person not deriving his power from the very trough at which the careerists feed. He would expose our supposed betters as the very insidious, odious, and yes, deplorable gang of rogues he had labeled as such from the moment he entered the stage. He said he would build an enviable economy. He promised to become the greatest jobs president, to lower taxes, radically reduce regulation, and put a chicken in every pot, and would deliver all of it. It would take the most disputed presidential election in history, surpassing even the legendary contest of 2000, to take him down. It would take a contest in which every metric that had proven 100% reliable in predicting election results in the past would all, for the first time, and at the same time, be turned on their heads. The certain winner would lose. The generic opponent would be declared the winner. Black is white, white is black. His reported defeat would come to define one of the newest words in the cultural lexicon, gaslighting, a popular formulation for an age-old question. Are you going to believe me or your lying eyes? Surely your eyes deceive you. Those metrics signifying approval of the great bulk of his policies, the extreme voter enthusiasm, the massive rally, spontaneous as they were, stretching all the way to the blue basin of California, would be dismissed as little more than an illusion, merely scattered anecdotal evidence. Massive vote dumps in the middle of the night in key states and a mile-high pile of sworn allegations and testimony across the land on election fraud would be dismissed with the back of the hand. His media-defined persona and a virus from a bat would be blamed for his inevitable defeat. In the words of the songwriter, he fought the law, and the law won. He would be vanquished, but not into the mist of history. Whether Trump's populist genie can be shoved back in the moldy bottle or the toothpaste squeezed back into the stale institutional tube is now for others to decide. But rest assured that the shockwaves of Donald Trump's once-in-a-lifetime run, his one-man crusade to put America first against the darkest of forces and longest of odds, shall continue to be felt long past his departure from the White House. We will break away for a moment, then come back with Cal Thomas and his latest book on a subject most befitting to the moment, the rise and fall of superpowers and America's expiration date.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
Far more important than my political future and far more important than yours, the well-being of our country.
This is Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
America's expiration date, the fall of empires and superpowers, and the future of the United States. That is a mouthful and a lot to take on in a single book, let alone a lengthy discussion. But if there's one man who could write such a far-reaching and lofty volume based on his many years of experience at America's political, cultural, and religious line of scrimmage, it's the acclaimed columnist and author of too many books to count, let alone enumerate, My old friend, and that means real friend, not Facebook friend, Cal Thomas. Cal, welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tim. Good to be with you as always.
I know you prefer the baseball analogies, and I do too, but you go with whatever is available. So your book, Cal, is described as a warning and a wake-up call to learn history so we're not doomed to repeat it. What empires in history are particularly instructive to what America's facing today?
Well, I think they all are, Tim. I write about 8 of them and finish with a chapter on the United States. They all follow the same pattern. Human nature never changes. You can dress up people in a toga or a suit or a dress, or if you're in San Francisco, all 3 at the same time, I suppose. But the commonality for all of them, massive national debt. We are approaching $30 trillion in debt. That cannot be sustained. Uncontrolled immigration without assimilation. Joe Biden says he's not going to extend the wall anymore and basically open our borders again. A loss of a shared moral sense. Who disagrees that that is happening now in America? And a corollary, a loss of a faith in God. Gallup poll said a year or so ago that 20% of millennials no longer believe in God. So all of these things were factors in the collapse of other empires. And it was Ronald Reagan who said about America that we're only one generation away from losing it all. Democracy, a constitutional republic like ours, is not the normal state of affairs in the world. You look around, you don't see freedom of the press everywhere. You don't see the ability of people to vote for their leaders everywhere. Oppression of women, religious minorities, all of these things are the norm. We're an oasis in this desert of inequality around the world. And I'm very concerned about it. And I don't think we have much time to turn it around if we can.
Now, Cal, I've watched and studied 15 presidential elections in my lifetime, you probably even more. How do you see this wildly controversial 2020 election affecting or changing the nation, not in terms of who won so much as how the nation is likely to process what happened and how it will impact America, the superpower, the democracy in the years ahead?
Well, I do think it's going to re-energize an awful lot of people who feel that there was fraud in the election. And who can doubt that? I mean, the thing that bothers me is that more than 200 people have signed affidavits under oath saying that they witnessed fraud. And yet no court has been brave enough to at least hear their arguments. They've come up with all kinds of excuses for not doing so. Now, these people were put under oath, and perjury is a felony, and you can go to jail for it. So why not have a court at least hear these witnesses, put them under oath on the witness stand, let them be cross-examined, and if they have video or printed evidence, let them present it. This, I think, would help restore the credibility of this election, which huge numbers of people don't trust. Now, I don't know, I think that the Democrats, which spent 4 years trying to undermine and delegitimize and impeach President Trump, we're not going to sit back with our arms folded on Election Day. You would have to be a fool to think that. I want to see the credibility of this system restored. I think it's very important to the future of our country. And if 74 million plus who voted for Donald Trump don't believe that it was credible, I think that's going to harm the election process in the future. The real answer to this, of course, is get rid of mail-in ballots and require voter IDs. That would take care of the fraud overnight.
On a broader scale, how can we realistically reverse or at least significantly slow down what you depict as America's downward slope to self-destruction?
I think we have to start with the schools. You've got so many kids in these government schools, public schools, and universities that do not teach the real history of the United States, that teach America has the stain of slavery like the scarlet letter or a mark of Cain on their forehead that can never be removed. Never mind the Civil War that was fought to end slavery. Never mind the trillions of dollars that have been spent on anti-poverty programs. It's something that we're just never going to get away with. And so I think we've got to homeschool our kids. We've got to put them in private schools, Christian schools. We've got to stop sending them to these universities where these leftover hippies from the 60s teach them that America is a rotten place. We need to be taken down a few pegs. We're no better than any other nation. And the amazing thing is, we don't send our soldiers, sailors, Marines over to the enemy camp to be trained, but so many conservatives and Christians willingly and, in fact, subsidizing their children into these intellectual re-education camps and expect them to come back home with something other than the values they've been taught at these institutions. And so we've got to rescue the next generation. We've got to start it right away, regardless of the cost.
Now, if we've learned anything in the last 4 years, it is that we really do have two Americas, one red, one blue. How can they be reconciled after all the water that's gone over the dam or under the dam?
Yeah, I don't think we can reconcile. I think we just have to win on the issues. And whatever one thinks of Donald Trump's personality, he has proved that conservative values and issues work. From tax reductions, which fueled a huge economic boom that cut across all demographic lines, African Americans, Hispanics, Asian Americans, everybody did better. Wages went up. If it hadn't been for COVID, I think Trump would have coasted to re-election. And the left knew this, and that's why they had to do everything they could to undermine. Look at the 4 peace agreements with Arab/Muslim nations in the Middle East. No other president has done that. Jimmy Carter did it with Egypt, but nobody else since. That is absolutely miraculous. Look at the rollout of this vaccine. All the so-called experts were saying last spring, Trump didn't know what he was talking about. There's no way they were going to get a vaccine before the end of the year. It would require a miracle. Well, the miracle happened. Does he get credit? No. The left says, it was developed in Germany. Listen, we poured billions of our tax dollars into Pfizer, into AstraZeneca, into Moderna to produce these things. And I think Trump deserves an enormous amount of credit for it. But of course, the media and the left will never give him credit for anything.
What do you think of one idea that's very complicated, but would give everybody on the red and blue sides what they want? And I'm going to call it radical federalism. Have the federal government responsible for defense and infrastructure, the mails and the like, the basics, and devolve everything else to the state. So Vermont can be a progressive paradise with unlimited abortion privileges, while Alabama can be great on gun rights and traditional values. What do you think of that? As complicated constitutionally as it would be, is that the only workout of the situation that would give both sides what they want?
Well, you alluded to the 10th Amendment, of course. Anything that is not specifically directed or written about in the Constitution shall be reserved for the states and local governments. Look, the founders wanted government to be limited so the people would be unlimited. But we've gotten way away from that. One of the reasons for frustration about government and about Washington especially is that people are demanding things of government that it was never designed to produce. And so government grows and grows less and less responsive to individuals and to state and local governments. This is why people are so angry at it. But we've got to stop demanding more from Washington and start demanding more of ourselves. Personal responsibility, individual accountability are the founders concluded were the best routes to pursue. I always think that refer to something Barbara Bush said years ago. It was so great. She said, men and women, if you have children, they must come first. Our success as a nation, your success as a family, depends less on what happens in the White House and more on what happens in your house.
Okay, you can't top that one. Now, before I let you go, though, I got to ask you about TV news. Your 50-year journalism career includes anchoring and reporting for a local station in Houston, NBC News in Washington, Fox News Channel, so you know TV. With the elite media transforming First Amendment journalism to undiluted advocacy during the Trump era and losing pretty much all their integrity and credibility, and niche channels like Newsmax and One America News going hard after conservatives defecting from Fox, as someone who's been involved in local news, I'm wondering if you, like me, believe that local news may be the only place left to turn for getting actual unbiased news reporting.
Well, I have all these wonderful people I worked with at NBC News in Washington when I was a copy boy. I have their pictures hanging on my wall not far from us right here. And these were real journalists. These were men and later women who came out of newspapers and wire services and knew how to write. David Brinkley, who was one of my favorites and a huge presence in the news business in the 60s and 70s and into the 80s, said it's impossible to be objective, so we must try to be fair. So but I think fairness has gone out the window. As you say, it's become advocacy now. You have this revolving door. You have Jake Tapper on CNN, who used to work for Senator Tom Harkin, a Democrat of Iowa. You had Chris Matthews, who for years was on MSNBC and NBC, and who used to work for Tip O'Neill. You've got George Stephanopoulos, of course, who was in the Clinton White House and was dubbed a journalist. He's no more of a journalist than I am an astronaut, although I think I might qualify more for being an astronaut since I spent 2 tours in Houston. I just think that there is no real journalism anymore. So much of it, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and other major publications have become propaganda arms of the Democrat Party, not only because of the bias, but also because of what they don't report. You look at the Hunter Biden thing. There's so many stories that they sit on and don't report. And Chris Plant, one of my favorite talk show guys, says the great power of the media is the power to suppress, the power to ignore. So there are 2 ways to be biased. One in the way something is covered, and the other way in what is not covered.
Cal, it's always a pleasure. The book is America's Expiration Date, The Fall of Empires and Superpowers and the Future of the United States. If it does well as all of your previous books, you're going to be a wealthy man, and I expect you to share some of that largesse with me.
Well, I will after I give it to the federal government.
That comes first, always.
Cal, all right, happy Christmas.
You as well. Thanks for joining us.
Okay.
Cal Thomas. We will break away briefly, then come back with Talkin' Liberty.
Liberty Nation with Tim Donner.
And now, it is time to welcome in our regular contributor, constitutional lawyer, and LibertyNation.com legal affairs editor, Scott Cosenza, for the portion of the show which we call Talkin' Liberty. Hello, Scott.
Hello, Tim.
Okay, right to the heart of the matter, gun rights, and Smith & Wesson has sued the New Jersey Attorney General. Why is that?
Well, let's get the difficult part right off the bat. The man's name is Grewal, I think is how you say it. It's a tough one for me to wrap my mouth around.
I think we can go with Grewal and be pretty safe.
All right, fair enough. He has weaponized the New Jersey Attorney General's office to go against gun manufacturers, and he set his sights on Smith & Wesson, and he's just sent them subpoenas for years-old advertisements under the novel legal theory that if they have advertised that possession of a gun might make someone safer in the home, for instance, that he can maybe sue them because that's false advertising. Now, if that sounds like thin gruel on which to attack, a corporation that sells a high-quality product, Tim, to people who want to buy it, it is. And it's just a blatant attack on the gun-owning rights of the public that he gets to use the government paycheck for to pay for the attacks. Now, Smith & Wesson has countersued or initiated a suit in federal court to have them back off. So we're going to have to wait and see how the courts decide, but a lot of action there.
The Supreme Court hearing the NCAA dispute over compensation for student athletes. And Scott, for years, it's been pretty obvious that college sports is nothing more than another professional enterprise dressed up as a legitimate academic experience.
It seems like we're marching ever closer to the point where the NCAA will have to just pay these people what they're worth in terms of what they bring in, which on the high side is a fantastic amount of money. I mean, the average, sideliner at a D whatever school is not making big bucks. But if you're in the Division I, if you're one of the people who sports fans know their name of that are buying jerseys, well, I think at some point they're going to have to be really compensated. This case doesn't concern actual paychecks, though, Tim. It concerns only ancillary education benefits. The previous to a recent Ninth Circuit ruling, which is where this case comes out of, the NCAA said that those students were restricted from getting educational add-ons commensurate with their scholarship. So they couldn't get, for instance, graduate degrees awarded as part of their compensation, or computers or lab fees and microscope kind of stuff. And the Ninth Circuit said, no, that's appropriate to give these people education-related benefits and items. And so this case concerns whether or not just on that one narrow question, but if they are allowed to give or permitted to give these kinds of things, that just increases, the compensation that these students will get. And I think it's going to be part of the, a hole in the dam that kind of breaks it open when these people demand to get compensated. The coaches, the AD directors, the Nikes and the Reeboks and the shoe companies, everybody's making money off this, except for the people who make it all possible, the actual student athletes.
Let's move on to maybe the primary business which has been affected by the coronavirus, and that is the restaurant business. And in D.C., a new law is requiring restaurants to rehire staff that they were forced to lay off during the pandemic.
It just breaks your heart when you see this socialism applied on the granular level and know that how frustrating it's going to be for the owner of the restaurant who's trying to get restaffed and reopened and has to wait days for people who were laid off or left during the pandemic to come back to work, because he's going to be required to offer them jobs first. And let's not discount, Tim, the even greater pool of people who will be frustrated by this, the potential worker pool for restaurants who will not be able to secure employment with the ease they would have previously. It's a yoke around their necks. The idea that government's going to help here by instituting these qualifications for employment, I think, are just so sad, because it's all going to weigh on the backs of the people who have it the worst, the people who need to work in these restaurants because that's their highest value in the marketplace to feed their families, and the people who own them or are trying to staff them to give their customers a product they'll pay for.
Meanwhile, Scott, and finally, an unlikely group of heroes have emerged in the beautiful sunny climes of San Diego, California. Who was it that helped to block a lockdown order for businesses? Why, it was San Diego strip club owners.
Pacers, showgirls, and cheetahs sued the county of San Diego and its public health officer and got a cease and desist order that allowed them to operate. They have never been a spreader of COVID-19. They've all followed, all the rules and the capacity restrictions, and they just want to be able to open with those in place. They're not saying they should be able to open at full capacity or in a pre-COVID way, but just that they should be able to, within those science-mandated restrictions, make a living. And they got They got a California judge to agree. Now we'll see, Tim, if how the how appeals work in this case. But for now, anyway, salute Pacers and cheetahs.
Thank you, Scott.
Thanks, Tim.
Scott Cosenza, legal affairs editor at LibertyNation.com. This program, Liberty Nation Radio and LibertyNation.com's own podcasts, The Uprising, hosted by Scott and The Rabbit Hole, Politics and Prose, where past is prologue. All of them available on demand at LibertyNation.com. So that is it for this week, but we'll be back at you next week. Same time, same station. Till then, this is Tim Donner saying stand up for liberty. And we'll see you next time on Liberty Nation Radio.